Okay, welcome to the iPad podcast, episode 44. This is Lex at maxfuture.com. And it is Sunday, March 6, 2011. And again, a nice, crazy week in iPad Apple land. And why is it so exciting? Well, if you're an iPad fan, you well know that on March 2nd, 2011, Apple held an event in Buena Vista Center in San Francisco, a venue they often use. And it was made clear that the event would be to announce the iPad 2. And we weren't disappointed because it was a great event and the iPad 2 was announced. Now, the event started off very exciting with Steve Jobs coming on stage and announcing the iPad 2. And here's the video from the event. And everyone was quiet. And here comes Steve Jobs, who's been out on sick leave from Apple. He got a standing ovation. It was really exciting. It's exciting to watch on the video. You can go to the video on Apple's website or at maxfuture.com and see the whole hour and, 14-minute video. And it makes sense that Steve Jobs would come out from, his sick leave to present this because in a lot of ways the iPad and the iPad 2 are his baby. The simplicity of use, the elegance of it, obviously come from his vision to have a highly mobile, highly intuitive, easy to use computing device. So, it was very exciting.
We launched the...
Okay, so on March 2nd, Apple did announce the iPad 2, and it basically said that the iPad 2 is coming out on March 11th, which is a Friday, at 5 p.m., and it's going to be sold in stores at 5 p.m., and it's going to be sold for the first time online at 5 p.m., and we'll discuss that a little later. But let's talk about some of the key facts that are in the iPad 2. The first thing is, let's go by importance. The most important thing is that it's much faster, much more responsive. And what Apple says about that is it's more responsive in two ways. First, it has a new processor, which is a dual-core processor called the A5. The processor in the current iPad is an A4 single processor. Now, Apple doesn't give you a lot of the specs of what goes into that A5 processor. All it says is that it's 2 times faster than the current iPad. So we're seeing a doubling of the speed. Now, the other performance increase is that the video performance is much faster. And Apple says for that the graphics is 9 times, up to 9 times faster than the current iPad. And what it says is super fast graphics, go gamers go. This is on Apple's website. With up to 9 times the graphic performance, gameplay on iPad is even smoother and more realistic, and faster graphics help apps perform better, especially those with video. You'll see it when you're scrolling through your photo library, editing with iMovie, and viewing animations in Keynote. So those are the two performance things that make it worth an upgrade. And if it was just that alone, I would say it's worth upgrading because the iPad is very quick to start, and it is pretty quick in performance. But when you double the performance of the processor and when you go 9 times faster on the graphics, it's going to be in another world. So let's say there was nothing else improved on the iPad, that we just had double the processor and 9 times the video speed. I would say it's worth upgrading. But okay, so now let's go to the second. I'm going to put this at number 2, although there's an argument that it's at number 3 most important upgrade thing. And the second most important upgrade thing is that the iPad now has 2 cameras. It has one in the front and one in the back. And the one in the back, and I guess even the one in the front, can shoot in high definition. Now, it's not enough pixels in the back to be competing with the 5 megapixel camera on the iPhone 4. So it's mainly being sold as a video taking machine, and really it's being sold as a way, the two cameras, to allow FaceTime, the FaceTime video conferencing, to work on the iPad. So this is great. I mean, everyone was critical of the iPad because it didn't have two cameras. So that's number 2. To me, that's the second most important thing that was improved. The third most important thing, which is really a close number 2, is that the iPad is now significantly smaller. Not the screen size; it's still 9.7 inches, but it is thinner, lighter, and here's how it's thinner and lighter according to Apple's website. It is 15% lighter, so it weighs essentially 1.3 pounds, with slight gram differentiations based on, if it's, I'll go into the 3G chip, and it's 33% thinner. So it's thinner and it's lighter. Now that's significant. I mean, the goal here is to get lighter and lighter and lighter so that it competes in lightness with the much smaller screen size and weight of the Kindle. And Apple's going in that direction. Apple, with prior products, first with the iPod and then the iPhone, started making thinner and lighter devices. So the question is, given this screen size of almost 10 inches in diameter, how light and how thin can Apple make the iPad? And I think eventually, not maybe next year, not maybe the year after that, not even the year after that. I mean, you could imagine that the iPad becomes as thin as the cardboard on a pad of paper. A pad of paper in the back has that gray cardboard. And eventually, I think the technology is going to be there where it's just as thin as that cardboard. But it is getting thinner. So that's the third thing. Now, the fourth thing is really not a change, but it is a change given that the iPad has a faster processor and is thinner and lighter. And that is that Apple was able to maintain the great battery life with the iPad. It still can perform solidly with 10 hours of battery life. And I think it has 30 hours or 30 days of standby time. So if you just left your iPad sitting there unplugged, that would be 30 days. So that also is, part of the big announcement for the iPad. And let's see, what's the 5th edition? Well, the 5th edition was expected, and that is there is now, let's see if it's on this. There it is, a gyroscope, as well as an accelerometer and compass. I'm not sure. Well, the accelerometer was always there. The current iPad has an accelerometer, but now there's a gyroscope. I know there wasn't a gyroscope in the first iPad, and the gyroscope was in the iPhone 4. And what does the gyroscope bring to the iPad? What it does is it just makes the iPad much more responsive to movement. When the gyroscope was put in the iPhone 4, games that could take advantage of the gyroscope became more accurate in movement. And so now the iPad 2 will be even a better gaming device. And what Apple says on its website on this section is gyro, accelerometer, and compass. iPad knows your every move. With the built-in accelerometer, you can rotate iPad, this is what Apple is saying, to portrait or landscape, or even upside down, and whatever you're watching, reading, or seeing adjusts to fit the display. And now the accelerometer, 3-axis gyroscope, and compass all work together. They sense which direction iPad is heading and how it's moving, so games, maps, and other apps know your every twist, turn, tilt, and 360. It's an epic win for gaming, and that's just the beginning of better than ever iPad apps. So that's additional hardware that makes it better. Now the next thing, which is, it's not clear if it's hardware or software, but the next sort of mechanical improvement to the iPad is that Apple is adding video mirroring to the iPad 2. And what video mirroring is essentially to take whatever on the iPad, what you see, and have it appear on a larger or some other screen. And the way Apple does that is with a connection. It has a new accessory, which is an HDMI dock connector accessory. And the HDMI dock connector accessory will allow you to connect the iPad by HDMI to a large screen TV. And there'll be mirroring of whatever's on the screen. Now, Apple and iPad 1 allowed some video output with the digital AV adapter, which was available for the iPad 1. I have one. And you could only get some video output from certain apps that Apple allowed to have it out. Like the Keynote app, initially you could show it on a big screen with the AV dock connector, but initially you couldn't even, when it was doing that, you wouldn't see anything on the iPad. And that was kind of frustrating. I did a Keynote presentation where I work with the iPad hooked up to a monitor, and I couldn't see, I had to look at the monitor to see what the Keynote was. I couldn't look at my iPad. But with mirroring, you can do that. Whatever you can see on your iPad, you can see on a big screen. So I think Apple's limiting that to the iPad 2. And so we're going to have the ability to hook up an HDMI connector. And the HDMI connector also has a second plug so that you can charge the iPad as well as having it hooked up by HDMI to a second monitor. So this mirroring thing is great, and I'll go into that more later in this podcast because I have some observations about it and what it means. But you know, one thing I want to discuss is, do you think this is a hardware improvement, or do you think this is a software improvement? Now, I suspect that this may be, I believe Apple could do the mirroring before, and that it didn't implement it because it wasn't as great, the mirroring on the iPad 1, because the processor couldn't really handle it well. And that Apple feels now confident that the iPad 2 with the better processor in video processing can handle the mirroring. And the reason I say Apple could have done the mirroring before, because there was a jailbreak, there is a jailbreak app called Display Out by the Canadian jailbreak developer Ryan Petrich. And Display Out, if you jailbreak your iPad 1 and you put it in, it allows everything in the iPad 1 to be mirrored out. Now, I mean, it works really well, but maybe it didn't work very well for Apple. Apple wants perfection, so maybe Apple held out and said, we're not going to do this till the iPad 2. So I think Apple could have done it for the iPad 1, but Apple feels more confident with the iPad 2 in terms of video processor power and processor power. So that's also another hardware improvement. So that's an overview. Now let's get to other stuff. Okay, so now let's go to some other key facts that are further down the line. And one key fact is now the iPad comes in two colors on the front. In the front, the border is black, like it always has been, or white. And why is white significant? Because this past iPhone model, the iPhone 4, has no white model. Apple promised a white model, and it's not there. So that's significant. So now you're going to have to choose if you want white or black. I'm heading for black because I do think that white will make the vibrancy of the video not as vibrant. Now the other big change is that the iPad is going to come in here's another key thing that hasn't changed, which is that the iPad comes in 3 data sizes for storage, the same as the first iPad. So we didn't see any bump up there. The sizes are either 6 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, or 64 gigabytes. So nothing's changed there. You have to decide. And the other thing is the price hasn't changed. It's the same price as before. For the Wi-Fi only model, 16 gigabytes is $499. For the 32 gigabyte, it's $100 more, $599. And for 64 gigabytes, it's at $699. And then it comes in 2 different 3G models. One of the disappointments is that we didn't see a universal chip for 3G connectivity. In other words, it would have been great if you could buy an iPad 3G and it could work on AT&T or Verizon. Instead, you have to choose if you want 3G connection, if you want a chip that works with AT&T, or if you want a chip that works with Verizon. But the prices are the same. For 16 gigabytes, the cost is $629. For 32 gigabytes, the cost is $729. The cost for 64 gigabytes is $829. So you have to decide if you want Verizon or if you want AT&T. So those are the choices. Now, one of the interesting things is that the text specs are slightly different. So that means we now have 18. Well, let's see. We have 9 different iPads. But anyways, let's go to the text specs difference. So in terms of the text specs difference, now this is interesting. The weight of the Wi-Fi only version of the iPad is 1.33 pounds or 601 grams. Now the weight of the Verizon model is 1.34 pounds or 607 grams. So it's 6 grams more. And then the weight of the AT&T Wi-Fi model is 613 grams. So it's 12 grams. So the heaviest model is the 3G version for the AT&T. Now this is interesting because I wonder if this is a clue for something. On Apple's tech website, like the tech specs, isn't this interesting? Look here. Apple, in describing the weight of the Verizon model, calls it the Verizon model. Yet for the other one, it just calls it the 3G model. So what do you think this means? Clearly, the other 3G model is the AT&T model. But the AT&T model, I guess, also is going to work on GSM carriers overseas. So they don't call it the AT&T model. They call it just the 3G model. But then why do they call the Verizon model? In other words, there are other carriers overseas that can run CDMA, and Verizon runs the CDMA cell phone technology. Does this mean Apple doesn't plan to distribute a iPad that's CDMA compatible overseas? Because why call that only Verizon model? Because the GSM model for AT&T is going to be sold overseas. So if Apple was going to sell a CDMA model overseas, wouldn't it call it the 3G GSM model for the AT&T one, and for the Verizon one, the 3G CDMA model? So there's just slight nuance, slight difference. So what do you think causes the 6 gram difference in weight size between the GSM model of the iPad and the Verizon CDMA model? I guess, I don't know, the chip could account for 6 grams, or maybe the antenna is different for the AT&T version versus the Verizon version. And if you look at the wireless cell data connections, the 3G model, which is GSM, it comes on many different megahertz bands. It runs on 850, 900, 1900 to 2100, while the Verizon one just runs on two bands, 900 and 1900. So I'm not sure of the significance of that, but I do think that is significant. So, so those are some of the interesting tech specs differences between the two models. Okay, so the other thing that Apple really showed off in presenting the iPad 2 are the app and the app ecosystem for the iPad. Apple went out of its way to basically point out that there are 65,000 apps for the iPad, for work, for play, and everything in between. And then Apple really brought on stage Apple executives to show off two new Apple apps. Now remember, last time Apple showed off the iWork apps for the iPad, the Pages app, the Keynote app, and the Numbers app, which are the famous iWork apps. And this time they highlighted two playing apps, which are in iLife on the Mac, the iMovie app and the GarageBand app. And they showed a demo of how they worked, and they're both really cool, and it's really exciting. Now, we've already had an iMovie app on the iPhone, and it's somewhat limited. And the iMovie that's coming out on the iPad will also be a universal update, and I think it's free if you already have the iMovie on the iPhone. So I don't think I'll be paying anything for the upgrade to iMovie. But on the iPad, the iMovie, it looks to be much more comprehensive than what it is on the iPhone. And I got to tell you, I've used the iMovie app on the iPhone, and I've been able to edit a movie. Now, before we go into this, into the features of the iMovie app, I do want to mention one thing. There was, I listened to John Gruber on the talk show podcast that he does with on 5x5 Network, and they were having a debate over how do you get movies on the iPad. Are you going to be taking the movies with the iPad? And they were saying that's ridiculous because who's going to carry around the iPad to take movies? And they were saying, oh, I carry around my iPhone. I take movies with my iPhone. And I don't know where they've been living in the last year, because I got to tell you, even without iPad 2, I've been using the iPad, the original iPad, as a movie editor, even without iMovie. And it's very easy to transfer movies to the iPad, let alone the iPad 2. And that's because Apple, since the beginning of the iPad, made it easy for you to transfer both your photos and your movies from the iPhone to the iPad. All you need is that dock connector kit, the $20 or $30 dock connector, and you just, by cable, connect your iPhone to the iPad, and the photo library pops up and asks if you want to import your movies and your photos from iPhoto. And I've done that because there are some times when I've traveled and I haven't had my computer, but I had my iPad and my iPhone, and I wanted to dump some stuff off my iPhone onto my iPad and show it to family members. And it was just really, I could email it, but the quickest way is by cable. Now, Dan Benjamin and John Gruber were debating, oh, but that's so clumsy to do it by cable. You know, it'd be better if it all could be done in the cloud or wirelessly. And I agree, it would be nice to be done in the cloud. But the problem is that, you know, uploading stuff to the cloud through cell devices are still slow. And movies are pretty large file size. But it's actually quite quick to just whip out this little connector, and because you always have the charger for the iPhone. I carry it around when I travel, and I can plug it into the iPad, and I've been able to transfer the movies. And so there's no problem with that. And now, how have I edited movies on the iPad? Well, iMovie has not been on the iPad yet. It's coming out on iPad 2 on March 11th. But for the last year, I've been using a really great app that's both on the iPhone and on the iPad called Real Director. And Real Director, which was the first movie editing app on the iPhone, also has a size that fits on the iPad. And, you know, it basically allows you to edit clips, import clips, create projects, and add movie soundtracks and narration. And it's really good, and it's not as heralded as iMovie, but I've been using it. And frankly, on the iPhone, I use both Real Director and iMovie. So it's already there. So I have that to say. Okay, so Apple really makes a big deal about iMovie on the iPad. And, you know, if you go to the website, it says very independent filmmaking. iMovie helps you turn the HD video you shoot on your iPad, iPhone, or iPod Touch into a masterpiece worthy of the red carpet. And so basically, the big thing is that it's touch. Now, you could do this on the iPhone, but I guess with the extra real estate of the iPad, it's going to be easier to edit in on iMovie on the iPad. Now they added some stuff. There are already these themes that you could just drop into the movie timeline, and so Apple now has 3 new themes called Neon, Simple, and CNN iReport, which provide more ways to enhance your project. Now, interestingly, that they have this CNN iReport, so maybe they made a deal with iReport, which is that service where you can upload your reports to CNN, and maybe they'll play it. Now, the other thing they say is that you could do this before. You could choose your best photos taken with your camera and drop them into your project, or you could add photos you sync to your device. iMovie customizes a shot with a Ken Burns style panning effect that uses face detection to keep faces in frame. Now, I don't think the current version of iMovie has that, so that part's new. The current version, you can put pictures into your iMovie on the iPhone, but I think now that you have face detection, that's new. And also, apparently, you can enhance your snaps with graphics and text by selecting from a variety of text styles in each theme. So I have been able to put in text into iMovie already. Now, the other thing it says is that you can use pinch movement to open transitions to reveal the precision editor. So the precision editor, which we see here, I'm pretty sure is not in the current version of iMovie. This is new. So you can really be precise about editing 2 clips. And also, it looks like you're getting additional precision with the audio soundtrack. So these are welcome improvements. So basically, look, what they're doing is they're upgrading iMovie. It already exists on the iPhone, and now you're getting more things in the iPad, the version that works on all devices, including the iPad. Now, they also add some additional sounds. It says here you can cue the laughter of tears with background music and a collection of fun sound effects. So I'm pretty sure the current iMovie does not have sound effects. I think you can load a song from iTunes, but not sound effects. says here you can choose from 8 soundtracks that match the look and feel of iMovie themes, or browse and select a tune from your own music library. And with over 50 sound effects, iMovie lets you dial up the drama in every parting or pratfall. So these music themes already existed for, I guess there were 5 themes already for movies, but now we have 8. So that already existed. They're increasing the soundtracks, and we already had the iTunes Music access, but we're getting 50 sound effects. Now, in terms of your tracks, it says here you can drag to add, delete, and rearrange audio clips, easily adjust the volume of any audio track, and add multiple background songs or loop a musical selection to fill out your project. Now that part is new, because the current version of iMovie on an iPhone, I think you can only pretty much add one background song. You can't like layer them over each other. And it says here, iMovie automatically fades out the music at the end of your movie for maximum effect. And iMovie on iPad even lets you see audio waveforms for every clip. Now, seeing the audio waveforms, you couldn't really see them on the iPhone, so that's big. Now, this part's new. Now, Real Director had this. You know, Apple probably was, Real Director was always like a little ahead of iMovie on the iPhone and the iPad for features. So I feel bad for this company. And I say, you know what? Go out and buy Real Director. Have it. If you like editing movies, have iMovie on it and have Real Director. And support Real Director because they're breaking new ground and they're going to get much better too. So what it says here is now you can add narration to an iMovie on the iPad and the iPhone. And you didn't have that before, so you can narrate the action or create your own soundtrack by recording audio directly into your movie's timeline. And that there is a live level meter that lets you monitor your recording volume. It's easy to review, discard, re-record, or accept each take. And I'll tell you, like, you know, iMovie worked on the iPhone, or works on the iPhone, and Real Director works on the iPad, but it's a little... You know, this stuff takes up a lot of processor power. So I hope the new one, the new iPad has enough processor power to make it smoother. The bottom line is video, no matter what computer you're on, is processor hungry. And so, you know, as we get faster and faster processors and more memory on the iPad, you're going to be able to do things like video editing. Really, video editing is the most demanding thing you can do on a computer. That's number one. And then after that is audio recording. That's the second most demanding. And also high-resolution photo processing and rendering. Those are the most, processor-intensive things. So you can, one new thing is that you could play on the iPhone iMovie a movie, but now you're going to be able to keep it in iMovie and share it through AirPlay to your Apple TV, and as well as exporting it to your Mac or PC. And also there's like mirroring. And you can also now publish, you could already publish through the iPhone version of iMovie to YouTube, and I think Facebook, and now it adds, I think, Vimeo and CNN iReport. And you can also send it to your camera roll or to MobileMe. You always had that. And now this part's really new. You can transfer your iMovie projects between compatible iOS devices versus iTunes. So if you want to shoot with an iPhone and edit on an iPad. So this is pretty cool. You didn't have this before, so this is another little tweak in iMovie. I think I'm going to get a free update because I already have iMovie. So I'm really looking forward to this. Okay, so the other big new iLife app is GarageBand. GarageBand on the iPad. Now this is huge because we haven't had any GarageBand either on the iPhone or the iPad, and this is going to be really cool. And they demoed this, and it's really wild. So one thing that iPad GarageBand now has are instruments. Now we have instruments in GarageBand on the Mac, but they're not touch instruments. You have to trigger them from a keyboard or a musical keyboard or the typing keyboard. And what you now have is really a new instrument, because the iPad, we know when the iPad came out and the iPhone came out, one of the most innovative things that happened was that people started making musical instruments out of the iPhone. Remember, there was that thing that you could blow into it, and it'd be like a flute, and we've seen countless pianos on the iPhone and countless pianos on the iPad. And Apple probably saw all of that and said, you know what, those are very compelling apps. And Apple has sort of absorbed that and put that into GarageBand. So what GarageBand is, it's like GarageBand on a Mac. It's a DAW. Now, what's a DAW? A DAW is a digital audio workstation, and they first started coming out in the 1980s when computers started being rolled out. In fact, I bought a Mac in the late 80s because I wanted to hook up, keyboard synthesizers and have the Mac run all those keyboard synthesizers. And what GarageBand does, it records both audio, like you singing or playing an instrument, as audio waveforms, or as MIDI signals. And MIDI signals are just little signals that can trigger a synthesizer. But the big thing in this GarageBand that Apple is selling is that it comes with built-in instruments that you can play like real instruments and then record into the GarageBand. And this is what I'm really looking forward to. So what are the instruments? They have a drums, and they basically say you can sit there and you can drum out beats on 3 acoustic drum kits. The snare, the kick, the tom, the hi-hat, and cymbals each produce different tones depending on where and how hard you tap them. Now, one of the really cool things is that there's touch sensitivity with these instruments. Now, I've been fooling around with electronic instruments since the late 80s, and touch sensitivity is something that the people who make electronic instruments do to try to make it more lifelike. Because with a real piano, with a real acoustic piano, and with any acoustic instrument, you can make a note slightly louder or slightly softer depending on how hard you strike a note. And that's very hard to do electronically because you need sort of sensitivity to touch. And Apple is claiming that the GarageBand 2 can do that because its accelerometer is sensitive. Now, that's really interesting because, what if you put the iPad 2 on a flat table and tap on it? The iPad 2 is not moving really, but apparently the touch sensitivity works. So that, looks really cool, and I think I'm going to demo that when I get the iPad 2. The other thing is there's just a traditional drum kit. This is like what they looked like in the 1980s. You had these little panels, and so it's a recreation of a classic hip-hop drum machine. And then they have regular piano keyboards. Now, this was demoed, and they made much of the fact that you can, on the fly, go up and down the octaves. Now, for someone who's not a musician, let me explain. This is a replica of just a slice of a piano keyboard. And a piano keyboard, a traditional big piano, has many octaves. And let me put the mouse here. This is C2, and this is middle C. And this is 1 octave. And then C4 is another octave. So essentially the iPad shows you just 2 octaves. Now generally you can't play much of a song on 2 octaves because you'll be just in the middle of the piano. And so Apple's solution is that you can on the fly hit these arrows and they will move up octaves as you play. And I think that's going to be a challenge. But I do think some bands are going to be formed. We've already seen bands using the iPad as an instrument. But what you could do is get two iPads and put them next to each other. And one iPad would be the left hand, and one iPad would be the right hand. And you would just send out the audio from two different iPads, and that would be your instrument. And finally, there's a synthesizer keyboard. And it's the same thing, I guess. Here you could you have 2 octaves, and you can do all sorts of cool leads. And according to Apple's website, there's over 70 modern and vintage synthesizer sounds, including synth strings, leads, basses, and more. And you can use the arpeggiator to create rich melodies, soundscapes with a single finger. So that's very cool. Now, the other thing Apple sort of heralds that we haven't seen in the GarageBand that's on the iMac or the Macintosh is smart instruments. And so smart instruments are really, I would say smart instruments are for dumb musicians, because that's why they're smart. So if you really can't play and don't know how to play guitar, the smart instrument sort of dumbs down the guitar strings on the iPad. And so you can strum chords on acoustic and electric guitars and trigger finger picking and strumming patterns, or tap out your own riffs and melodies. And so what the smart instruments do is you could hit this, an E minor chord, and it will pick out the notes. You don't have to pick out the notes. Just by hitting this bar, it will do so. So this isn't a bad way for someone who's never played an instrument to sort of get excited about playing the guitar or excited about playing the piano. And it might be fun to improvise if you're a musician and create interesting stuff. And so I'm kind of looking forward to this sort of strum patterns. I have young children, and it might be fun to play with them. So they also have, in addition to smart guitars, they have smart keyboards. So we can have fun with that. And we also have smart bass. So you can do, so look, what if you got like 5 of these things? You could have a band. The band would be just playing, and here's the drums. You can drag and drop snare kicks and hi-hats to create your own beats and effortlessly move them around to try out different patterns. So finally, this is the DAW, the Digital Audio Workstation. This is what tracks look like. And this is, this is what GarageBand sort of looks like on the Macintosh and other, Apple bought eMagic many years ago. That was an independent German company that made Logic. And Apple now has its own Logic, and GarageBand is just the sort of the younger sibling in the Logic family. And essentially what you do is you record, you can record up to 8 tracks on GarageBand. And you can trim and arrange essentially just using your fingers to drag the loops. So that'll be kind of cool. You can swipe the mixer to fine-tune each track. Look, it's not going to be as powerful as GarageBand on the Macintosh, but it might be more fun because it'll be highly portable. You can take this around anywhere and create your own music. And it's also touch-based. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. In terms of 8 tracks, I don't think Apple made it clear if you can mix down the tracks. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in the old days when you had a limited number of tracks, what you could do is record let's say you had a 4-track recorder. You would record 4 separate tracks and then mix down the 4 to 1 track, freeing up the 3. And then you would mix down the 3 to the second track, freeing up 2. And then mix down 2 to 1, freeing up 1. That way you could get more tracks done. And Apple also gives a whole bunch of guitar amps, which can be accessed just by plugging in the guitar. And it has classic guitars, amps, and modern virtual guitar amps. And you can use touch gestures to operate the tone controls and swipe switches. So look, I mean, I think musicians are going to love this, because I could see somebody with a real guitar taking this iPad to a gig, plugging it in. Also, there are stomp effects. These stomp effects are what guitarists use, and there's like cool pictures of them. So look, I'm thinking of just getting a guitar just to play with this. And then, what's this? It's an audio recorder. You can use the GarageBand. So you can use this really for podcasting. You can record your voice or any acoustic sound using the built-in microphone on the iPad, then apply any one of 8 fun sound effects like robot, chipmunk, telephone, monster, and more. So that's kind of interesting. And then finally, sharing. So apparently you can take GarageBand for iPad and export your project to the Mac as well as the song to iTunes. And then you can open it in GarageBand to refine your song. So that's kind of cool. Look, in the picture here, there's a send to iTunes feature. So this is going to be kind of cool to see how that works. Now, it doesn't say if GarageBand will work on the iPhone. I doubt it will work on the iPhone. It looks like it needs much more landscape and room to work than on the iPad than on the iPhone. So I doubt that'll be available. But I do believe it'll work on the earlier generation iPad. So the other thing Apple announced is that there'll be a new cover for all the iPad 2s. It'll be a cover that's just on the front side, and it has the clever name of the Smart cover. And what makes it smart is that it has 2 magnetic clips that correspond to 2 magnetic parts in the iPad, so it just snaps on. And the top part, and it only covers the top part, has 4 folds, and you can roll it back and it folds over and makes a perfect triangle and flips back, and the triangle supports it in an incline for typing or in a vertical incline as a movie stand. And these smart covers come in 5 vibrant polyurethane colors, I guess for $39, and they come in 5 leather covers for $59. And so this is the new cover, and there's a lot of buzz about the iPad 2's cover. And let's see, the leather, yes, the leather costs, let's see if we can get this. We don't have a price, but it looks like it's going to be, no, it's $69. So that's another new feature in the iPad 2. Okay, so what about the iPad Smart cover? I have some thoughts about it. My initial reactions to it are, boy, they look cool, but also, boy, I hope they work and are essentially effective and aren't just something that I buy and have to throw away. And why do I say that? Well, the cool part is this. The cool part is that smart covers look really light and are really functional. Essentially, the cover is only for the front and is kept on by two magnetic hinges that latch on to 2 magnetic spots on the side of the iPad. And the smart covers, essentially, if you look closely at them, they are divided into 4 sections that bend. And the cool thing is, when you can sort of scroll it back and it'll fold into a triangle. In other words, the 4 sizes will fold into a triangle, and if you keep rolling them back, they'll roll to the back of the iPad, and create a triangle, a three-sided, a triangle that supports at an angle the smart pad, the smart cover, the iPad smart cover. So that looks really cool, and it's functional, and it's a quick way to set up a sloping stand for the iPad 2, and also so you can now support it at a low angle or prop it up at a high angle using this essentially a triangle base. Now my concerns are, how well does the magnetic hinge keep the cover on the iPad when you have the iPad in, let's say, a bag? I mean, I carry my iPad, my current iPad, in a leather computer bag, and so it's in its cover and it's in a leather computer bag. And the current Apple cover, which covers the both back and front, is it's sort of like a notebook binder, and so it's pretty secure there. So one concern I have is that you put the iPad with this cover in a bag and it moves around and somehow the cover comes off. Now, a number of people who were at Apple's March 2 event who played with it, like Mr. Gruber at Daring Fireball, said that the magnet latches are on very tightly so that it's not going to come off. So I guess that's my main concern. My second main concern is there is no cover on the back side with this smart cover. And the back side, I think, of the iPad 2 is very similar to the iPad 1. But my concern is it'll get scratched up. And why is that a concern? Well, because it could affect the resale value. I tend to sell and resell my iDevices. I've sold several of my prior iPhones. I currently have my iPad up for sale, and if it gets scratched up, it could reduce the price a little bit. But let's look at the positive signs. What's the big plus here? Well, the big plus with the smart cover is that since it's only really one side of the iPad, it's going to be a lot lighter than the current cover for the iPad that Apple makes, which covers both sides. And weight makes a difference. The iPad with iPad 2 is like 3 ounces less than the current iPad, or 2 ounces less, at 1.3 pounds. But it might also be saving weight by the fact that you don't have the old cover with 2 sides, but rather you'll have the smart cover with 1 side. So the weight is a big plus. And also it may be that putting the new smart cover into dock mode, it looks like it's going to be a lot quicker and a lot easier than when you do it with the current cover for the iPad. With the current cover, you got to bend back 1 side and then tuck it in to a flap on the back side of the cover of the second side of the cover for the iPad. And it's a little slow. And it looks like here with the smart cover, you'll just roll it back in this sort of rolling triangle that then becomes a dock in the back. So it also could be quicker to set up as a reclining dock if you want to type on the iPad 2, or as a stand if you want to have it be propped up so you can watch a movie. So overall, I think this is really cool. I also like that it comes in many colors. I was kind of annoyed that the Apple cover for the first iPad was only in black. And here we have 10 colors. There are 4, 5, 6, 7 colors for the cheaper polyurethane covers, and or there are 8, and then it looks like 3 colors in leather. That's red, dark charcoal, and black. So that gives you more options. So I think these are going to be very popular. I'm not sure if I'm going to get the leather version or the polyurethane version. So I'm convinced that Apple wants the iPad 2 to become essentially the ultimate Apple TV. And why do I say that? Well, one clue is the fact that the HDMI cable connector for the Apple II has a second input that allows you to use the dock charging connector to charge the iPad 2 while it's connected by HDMI to a large screen TV. Now, some of you may say, well, sure, Apple did that because it will help professionals use the iPad 2 when hooking up the iPad 2 to do like a keynote presentation. But really, is that the case? Because think about it, the iPad, whether the iPad 2 or iPad 1, has tremendous battery life. It can run 10 hours while in use. So why do you need a charging connector? Well, I guess it gives comfort to someone making a presentation in an office through Keynote that the power on the iPad isn't going to run out. But I think actually the charging is perfect for if you turn your iPad 2 into essentially a connected Apple TV to your big screen TV. So in other words, I think Apple is helping consumers who want to use the iPad 2 as a permanent ultimate Apple TV hooked up to their TV. So if you just permanently dock your iPad 2 to your big screen TV and never move it, you're going to need a power charger because you're not going to want to constantly unplug the HDMI. So by having the second power charger, you can connect the iPad to the plasma TV and never have to move it. You don't have to unplug anything. It'll be plugged to power and plugged to HDMI input of the screen all the time. So I think Apple is actually facilitating the iPad 2 to become essentially an ultimate Apple TV. Okay, so the big day is March 11th. That's when the iPad 2 goes for sale. And the interesting thing is it's going for sale at 5 p.m. and Apple's not letting you pre-order it. Now, one theory as to why Apple's not letting you pre-order it is that Apple wants lines at Apple stores to show that there's great interest in the iPad 2. And I think Apple's doing this because Apple last month rolled out the Verizon iPhone, the thing that people have been waiting for a long time. And Apple allowed people to pre-order it. And almost immediately, the pre-order allotment for the first day was like sold out. And there was huge selling on the first day. But what was interesting is that all these crews went to Apple stores when it was going to be first available, the Verizon iPhone in the Apple stores, and there were no lines. There were hardly any lines anywhere. And I think Apple was sort of shocked by that. So I think Apple wants there to be lines at 5 p.m. on Friday, March 11th. And the question for me is what to do. What to do? Should I get it online? By the way, I'm definitely going to get it. I have an iPad, a 64 gigabyte Wi-Fi model, and I love it. It's a fantastic piece, but I want to upgrade. So I put my iPad 64 gigabyte on eBay, and the auction ends, I think, on March 10th or March 9th. And I put it at a minimum price of $20, and I have a higher reserve. So we'll see what I get. So I have so many decisions to make before March 11th, which is, one, do I go to the store and try to wait in line and get it? I'll have to take some time off from work and take some vacation time to leave work early to get there by 5 p.m. And I think a lot of people are going to be annoyed because in the past, Apple has started selling them early in the morning. So it seemed a little more rational to like wait in line at 5 o'clock in the morning as opposed to taking off time from work, after lunch and waiting in line. So that's a question. Should I wait in line and try to get it at 5 p.m.? Now, Apple's also going to be selling it in other stores like Best Buy and Walmart. But obviously the biggest allotment's going to be at the Apple store. And then the question is which one to get. I currently have the Wi-Fi model, and I really like the Wi-Fi model. But it's nice to have 3G built in, because if you're ever in a pinch and can't get Wi-Fi, you might want to get 3G. Now, the thing is, if you jailbreak your iPhone or pay for the tethering plan from AT&T, you can get internet access by having your iPad connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot on your iPhone. Now, the only downside to that is you're not going to have really good GPS location in the iPad, because if you have the Wi-Fi version of the iPad without the 3G, you don't really have the GSP chip for tracking. Now, why is that such a big deal? Well, I guess if you photo tag photos or video that you take with the iPad, you want the GSP chip. Also, if you want to use the iPad as some sort of GSP map when you're driving, that's a consideration. So it costs $125 more for every one of the models to have the 3G in it. So the question is, should I go Wi-Fi or should I go 3G and pay extra money? And the other question is, should I go what data size? I currently have a 64 gigabyte, but it's generally only half full. On the other hand, if I go to a 32 gigabyte, if I continue to use it the way I have, it's going to be completely full, and I'm not going to have any room to spare. And I kind of like having room to spare. And if I go for the 16 gigabyte, I'll have no room to spare. On the other hand, everyone says the real value is the 16 gigabyte one, because it's the Wi-Fi version that's 16 gigabytes is only $500. So I'm sort of challenged with all these choices to make. And, we'll have to see. I'll give you updates on Twitter, on maxfuture.com, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, well, thanks for listening to the iPad podcast from Max Future. This is Lexstar, and this was recorded on March 6, 2011. Hopefully next time I talk to you, I will have the much heralded iPad 2. And remember, you can always leave me a voicemail at 617-826-9676, or send me an email at maxfuture@gmail.com. So thanks for listening, and see you next week.